Well, good afternoon or morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us at DPLA's Open and Community Meeting. Felton Thomas, I'm the Director of the Clean Public Library and also the Board Chair for DPLA. And we have a really busy meeting here today for you. We have a lot of things, so we're fortunate to have Sarah Lutman and Ben Lee with us as speakers. So without holding everybody up, I want to now turn it over to our Executive Director, John Bracken, who's going to do all the introductions and get it started.
Good afternoon. Happy summer. I will get us started. Look, I'm already cracking Sarah up, but I haven't even started yet. Before I turn it over to my colleagues who are joining us today, I will, I think Suzanne is running the chat room, so she could throw in the agenda, but I'll give an update on what we've been working on generally. Sarah, who has been with us for almost a year now, not quite. Sarah Lutman will give us an update on the Cultural Heritage Program process that we've been running this spring. And then Ben Lee, who is here with us, and Meaghan O'Connor from DC Public Library, who's on her way to be here with us, will share out insights and learnings that we've had from a series of conversations with many of you I see here in the room this spring around AI and libraries. So, we've had a busy spring. Sarah will be talking about, the transition work that a lot of you have been part of and that process. And I just want to say that something clicked off. It's been while we've been doing this kind of high level strategic process that Sarah will detail, we've also been doing the work. And I specifically want to shout out the DPLA team for being able to do that, to maintain the work, which I'll give you some highlights this quarter while we've been having these broader conversations. So first off, since we met in April, we've been running a series of webinar series. And one thing I want to highlight is that work. We've not been doing that work, like everything else I'm going to talk about. We've not been doing that work on our own. The working groups that have been core to our work over the last, for such a long time. Sarah, would you mind muting until I hand you the mic? I'll hand you the mic in 2 minutes. Thank you. Have really stepped up to the fore, and along with Dominic and the team, driven some programming that many of you have been part of. So we've been running a series. The Outreach and Assessment Working Group has set up a series called Critical Approaches to Assessment. The first one happened last month, I believe. The second is coming up in 10 days, focused on Wikimedia metrics and tools, including a set of partners of ours, including Giovanna from the Wikimedia Foundation, Jamie from the National Agricultural Library, and Evan Robb from Northwest Digital Heritage. There you go. Magically, the speak it and the link appears. And a third part of that series will be with the team from Dcraft, who will be talking through the tool that they've been building, which is designed to help us better understand the ways in which humans use our material, which we know has been a top mind question and desire for our work. We've also been holding regular office hours, second Tuesday of the month at 2 p.m. I think we're delaying it by a week this month because you'll notice Dominic is on vacation this week. But it's really, I'm really appreciative of the communal spirit that's been driving this work, and thanks to everyone involved with the working groups this year and the past for creating this really important apparatus. Second, many of you recall the Banned Book Club, which we launched about a year ago at this time. And a couple of things to highlight about that. One, we've been really happy that we've been recognized for the campaign. The bannedbookclub.us campaign won a series of awards this spring from the Art Directors Club, from Cons. Really, that created an opportunity for us not just to receive laurels for the campaign that we ran, But it's been an opportunity for us to underline the work and the urgency of this moment for leveraging our platforms to counter the scourge of book banning. And it's also given us an opportunity to underline why we're doing that, right? And one of the orientations we have for the Banned Book Club is we're not just opposed to the removal of books from shelves, and we've created an opportunity so we can digitally put titles back on shelves and make them available to everyone. But also we know that the removal of those books have been driven in many instances by an intentional desire to erase voices from American history and from the American experience, right? And in particularly Black and brown and queer authors have been targeted, we've seen through the book bans. And so, we've one of the ways we've also tried to extend that focus is by establishing a Banned Book of the Week campaign over the last couple of weeks, which you might see, and that's ongoing. So that's a little bit of a highlight of what the team's been up to over the last 90 days. And now I'm going to ask our friend and colleague in Minnesota, Sarah Lutman, who's been with us at the table. If you remember, we launched a program assessment with Sarah in the fall. And as we've been running the process that came after that to find a long-term home for this work, Sarah's been at the table and helping to lead that as well. So I will turn the mic over.
Thank you, John. Hi, everybody. Happy Monday after a holiday weekend. I hope you're all digging out. It's like the snowstorm of email. I am going to share my screen and get into presenter mode here, and just bear with me. And voila, did it work? Yes. So this is going to be a fairly brief and succinct, I hope, update on where we are with the RFP process. For those of you who've been following along, we issued a request for proposals for a new partner to assume the leadership of the cultural heritage aggregation work. And it was a two-step process, starting with expressions of interest, with conversations with potential funding partners who would, to recruit their interest in supporting the transition when we're ready to make it happen. Many hours of fielding calls from interested parties as people work to understand what exactly they would be getting themselves into if they took on the work. Recruiting a steering committee to review the proposals that we received. Just preparing the application questions and information requirements was a project. And then since we last met, we've reviewed these expressions of interest, invited finalist applications, held interviews with those who submitted full applications, and prepared for and conducted the steering committee review about 10 days ago, I think. I didn't look at exactly how many days ago it was, but it was a week before last. So just to talk about some of the ways the staff have been spending their time, quite a bit of effort was invested in the preparation of the expression of interest invitation and the application requirements, just discussing what we most needed from interested parties. Again, talking to people who wanted to prepare an expression of interest or who were at least thinking about it. Multiple EOIs, as we came to call them, were submitted and reviewed. Invitations were issued to prepare full applications. Staff reviewed and discussed each full application in advance of the steering committee meeting. We consolidated our questions and invited the steering committee to submit questions that we could include in interviews. And then at the committee meeting, all proposals were fully discussed. So our steering committee members, here they are, some are on the line, welcome. And also this steering committee group is shown on the DPLA website. Honestly, just getting everybody's headshots was a little bit of a project when it comes down to things that are included in a project that you might not think about. So where we are now with next steps is the DPLA board will need to review the staff recommendation for how to move forward. And that is likely to lead to further questions and discussion with the organization recommended. Much preparation will be needed to begin discussions with the successor. And most likely there will be lengthy conversations about elements of the transition plan, including the technology plan, the staffing, and network. And it's unlikely that we will be able to announce the transition before the basic elements are hammered out and a timeline is agreed to. So for those of you hoping to hear an announcement today, I'm afraid you're going to be somewhat disappointed because not only has the DPLA board not met to review the recommendation, but there are just a lot of details, some thornier than others, to work out before we start celebrating. So the path forward is likely to require DPLA's continued leadership. We will need to establish a process to guide the transition to help make sure connections are made with important partners, including funders, and just to help deal with speed bumps, which are inevitable. We're going to want to build on the momentum gained from this process to guide the transition of the network structure, ensure the adequacy and durability of the technical infrastructure. I mean, we'd like a seamless transfer that works for the audience. And then there's the not small task of winning philanthropic support to fuel the effort. So that concludes the slides that I prepared for today. And so I'll go back into gallery mode here so that we can see each other. And if people have questions, or John, perhaps you have additional items you'd like to add to, embellish, etc. Questions?
That's a lot to digest, Sarah. Thank you. And I will be posting or sharing those details that Sarah shared. I wanted to underline the thanks to everyone who's been part of this process, both the folks who raised their hands and asked, considered diving into this, those who did dive into the application, and the 13 folks, including one of the folks I'm going to introduce soon, who volunteered and took part in the review process with us. Folks really, the questions folks asked have been really helpful and are part of the discussion we're now having as a team. Yeah, that's the quick snapshot summary. We'll have more time for a full discussion that Felton's going to facilitate after our presentation, and we're a little bit ahead of schedule, and I know Meaghan was running for between meetings, so I think I saw Meaghan sign in, and so if Ben and Meaghan, if you guys are here, maybe I'll ask you to turn on your cameras, and I'll begin to make the shift and introduce the two of you.
Excuse me, John, there is one question in the Q&A.
All right. Do I have access to it? It's way up here. Okay.
Can we share an anticipated
Yeah.
timeline?
Hi, Kristen. Yeah, the plan is for Q1 of 25 to be the transition, which I realize is broad, and that's the extent of the timeline we have right now. The timeline we had was running up till today, and now we need to develop a new timeline as we understand where we are and where things are going. But yes, so I guess the answer is yes. That goal of a transition in Q1 is still the where we're operating from. Okay, good, and happy to share more as it goes forward, and and thanks to Recollection Wisconsin through the presence of Anne was a really helpful part of the conversations we've been having.
I would add one thing to that if I'm allowed, John, and that is that
You
we're not the
are.
only ones in charge of a timeline. The partner, it has to work for the partner too. So if we sound like we're hedging a little bit, just know that we're trying to also set up that this will be a dialogue now, and we want it to work for everybody.
The other question that came in from anonymous attendee says, in other meetings, we have stated we have funding. Now it looks like you are still working to secure funding. Do you or do you not have funding for this transition? The answer is yes, right? So we are raising, as hopefully we've shared before, we have funds committed from a set of funders, and we are in the process of raising additional funds. One of the key parts, we're mostly dealing with foundations, and one of the key aspects is they want to know where the funding is going to go. So we've provided updates with the funders. We have other meetings coming up soon, and feel really good about it, and realize that it must feel opaque. But as those of you who have engaged with foundations and done large scale fundraising, you know, there are lots of moving parts, and it's generally not, generally limits what we could say in public meetings. But I will say, having, been involved with this work for a while, I feel really good. The funding conversations we've had have been healthy and robust and engaged, and we have multiple folks who at a national level have committed to being part of this transition, and others that we're in conversation with.
So John, before Sarah,
Yeah,
I just want to, from the board, Sarah, we just want to thank you for your efforts and all that you've done, and the steering committee, all of those folks, the time and efforts they've done to put us in the place that we are. Board still has a very difficult and challenging decision ahead of it, but a lot of the work has been done by you and the committee. So thank you very much for all that you've done.
Oh, thank you, Felton. It's been extremely interesting. And I have another joyful part of it, which is I think it's important. And that's always the best fuel.
Yeah.
So in other work, many of you, we in February, we in partnership with Knight Foundation were part of convening 50 folks, most of whom were library directors from across the country, and some other folks, for an annual convening that Knight Foundation hosts for library leaders. The thrust of the conversations were, varied about how do you, what are the challenges and opportunities for libraries in a digital context, and invariably, and not surprising, AI and trying to get a handle in a pragmatic way for what AI brings, both in terms of opportunities and risks to our field, was something folks wanted to talk about. And in Miami, we were very excited. We were lucky to be kicked off in our discussion with a conversation between Ben Lee from University of Washington and Meaghan O'Connor from DC Public Library. I'll say briefly, since we were together in Miami, Ben and the team and I have had maybe about half a dozen small Zoom check-ins with mostly public library directors across the country, probing on, well, Ben and Meaghan share more, probing on what feels acute, what the gaps are, what's worrying and exciting people in the field, with an eye towards next year's Knight Foundation gathering, and being able to bring, well, I don't want to steal Ben's thunder, but to do some work and share some things at this really special gathering that Knight Foundation hosts every year for a couple of dozen folks. So all this to say, really thankful to Meaghan and Ben for being here with us, and Ben for being a thought and do partner throughout the spring. So that's my preamble to kick you guys off, and I think they're going to have a little bit of a conversation, and then we'll share a little bit about what we've heard, and love to hear what you guys are thinking about it, and see if it provokes any either points to talk about today or in the future. Having said that, I don't know who gets the mic first.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much, John, for the introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here. Meaghan, I don't know, I assume we'll keep this very conversational. Would you like to start? Should I start? What do you think would be best?
Ben, I think you should start because you can
Okay.
give this sort of like the AI setting. What are we even talking about?
That sounds perfect. Thanks, Meaghan. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here, and it was really a wonderful opportunity to be a part of these discussions going back to February. I think, as John alluded to, it seems like AI is in the air everywhere. It doesn't take me to make that clear to everyone. And so my own sort of orientation toward all of this is that I'm an assistant professor in the information school out at the University of Washington, and my work is all sort of the intersection of AI and thinking about digital collections at libraries, archives, and museums. And so it's been really a real, really exciting opportunity for me to be plugged into these conversations, specifically in the context of public libraries, and to have kicked off all of this with Meaghan back in February in Miami, and to see it through to now and looking toward the future. So I'll offer a little bit of context for what the conversations have looked like, both in Miami and over the past few months, and then maybe turn it over to Meaghan to talk a little bit about what you've heard at DCPL, what's coming up, what some of the questions and challenges are that you've seen, and use that as a jumping off point. And I do know that based on what we've talked about with John, we definitely want to keep this conversational and informal. So please do feel free with any questions you all may have to drop them in the chat at any point. So I think, on the basis of the conversations in February in Miami, it seemed like we really sort of got a sense of three common themes emerging from the conversations with public library directors and library leaders. These buckets that we saw, the first one was around questions surrounding collection development, thinking about various AI approaches to improve metadata or access or enrich materials in that way. The second was questions around sort of public-facing AI components. So what this might mean to build out public programming, what patron usage looks like, what questions people might have when they come to a library. And the third sort of bucket that we saw was more internal facing, looking toward the sort of organizational or operational context for AI, understanding what it might look like to have a policy at a library, or thinking through what this means both internally and also sort of setting best practices or the like. And so I think based on the conversations that we had, especially starting in Miami, we had the opportunity not just for Meaghan and myself to talk for, in a structured panel setting, but also then to have a breakout group where I think we had about 25 people share their own views on AI and what it's looked like embedded in their libraries or organizations. And we've gotten the sense that it seems like there's definitely a lot of talk around AI, but the question is then what does this look like when it's put into practice, and how various libraries might begin to stand up experiments or even move toward broader policies surrounding AI. And so I think the goal that we've really seen here in terms of what we can do collectively is use this next year, especially the time leading up to next February, for the next convening of the night meeting, to think through what specific experiments might look like from various public libraries who have been a part of this conversation, addressing each of those three areas of focus that we had mentioned. And so here we're really trying to think through what it might look like to have one or two organizations report out on an experiment related to each of those three buckets. So for example, related to internal or organizational thoughts, reporting out on what the process has been like to come together with a policy statement toward AI practices at the library, and walking through not just what the final statement might look like, but how the conversations have looked like internally to reach this, what the staff time has looked like and considerations have been toward making this possible. Reporting out on public programming, so not just on the programs themselves, but what it has looked like in terms of reception, engagement, seems like there might be a lot of momentum with moving forward. As you can imagine, there are a lot of different facets that one could take with AI in terms of what might interest the public moving forward. And I know Meaghan has some insights there from the programming that they all have been working on. So I'll definitely leave that for you, Meaghan. And then thirdly, thinking through the sort of collection development component, as I had mentioned, recognizing that many libraries have special collections that are great test cases for thinking through enrichment using some of these AI tools, of course, recognizing that doesn't come without its own set of considerations or complications that need to be taken in mind. But I think that sort of sets the stage for where we're at. And so the conversations that we've been having over the past 2 or 3 months here, as John mentioned, a half dozen or so conversations, have been really trying to get a sense from various library directors about what bucket areas might be most interesting to move forward with propping up experiments, and where they think would be most useful in terms of aligning their goals internally with what we're thinking about in terms of reporting out at the meeting in next February. So again, I think the sort of high level goal here is we're at a point where we've had conversations now with, I'd say, about 15 or 20 library directors, and we have a good sense of where different libraries are positioned, especially ones with different staffing considerations or bandwidth for doing this work, which bucket areas might be of interest. And I think moving forward here, they're going to start working more closely with these partners around, one or two experiments in each of these buckets to move them forward and steward them and see what we'll have when we report back on these in February, with the goal then, I think, using this as sort of a way of catalyzing broader discussions about what it might mean for libraries as a whole to take on some of these questions, recognizing that there's a lot of talk in the air, of course, in that half the challenge here, I think, is just synthesizing what else is going on and who's doing what. But with that, I'll turn it over to Meaghan, not to hug the airwaves here.
Thanks, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meaghan O'Connor. I'm the Director of Service Design Engagement at the DC Public Library here in Washington, DC. And I think I'm here to just sort of give a little color and illustration to what our library, just as an example, is doing. We are, I would say, dipping our toe in. We're doing some exploration. I don't think we're the vanguard on this. And I think there are a lot of things to consider. The first of which is that even among our staff, there are really varying levels of understanding of what do we mean when we talk about generative AI? What is it actually, and what does that mean for the library? In terms of policy, I just sort of want to quickly orient for DC. The district government actually set an AI values and strategic plan. So we have, for any agency in the district that's going to be exploring AI, either for workflow and implementation of government services, or something that we might do at the library more around education, we have a set of principles. You can find them on the DC government, on the web, which I'll drop the link. And then I'll also just quickly name the principles, because I think they bring up a lot of the issues that we encounter both in talking to the staff and the public. That any AI use by the DC government should have a clear benefit to residents. It should consider safety and equity. It should consider accountability, understanding if we're using this tool, who is the human who's ultimately responsible. Transparency, so that if people are engaging with an AI interface, it's clear that that's what it is. Sustainability, what is the environmental impact of this work, and then privacy and cybersecurity. So as we are exploring this, we're exploring it within the framework of the values that the DC government has set out. In terms of what we've done at the library, we've started off with a lot of staff conversations, and about a month ago, we had a lunch and learn, an informal conversation with a representative from Jobs for the Future, which is an organization that does exactly that. It's exploring what is the future of jobs and work. And they put out a report on the AI ready workforce, and one of their researchers came virtually to talk to our staff. And it was fascinating for me to sort of watch the flow of the conversation, what questions were popping up in the chat. And what we saw is there were some people who were really curious about what this could mean for the library, what it could mean for their work, how it could be useful. We saw some people raising up some of the concerns around the environmental impact and sort of the ethics of what are these large language models being fed, and are there issues with copyright? And then we had a few people who really expressed some real fear around what AI would mean for their jobs, for the jobs of workers across the city. And it was fascinating for me to see all those. And my role in my position is to work with that group to say, this, everybody's going to feel what they feel about AI. People are sort of all over the place in their feelings. And sometimes it's a feeling based on, I've really read up on this and I have a concern. And sometimes it's a feeling based on, like, the media is going crazy about this and I can't even take it all in. But the framing that I'm bringing to the group is, whatever you may personally feel, as the public library, we're thinking about what is our role as an institution of lifelong learning, an institution that focuses on information literacy. What is our role in working with the public to help them understand what is AI, to help them understand that they're probably already using it without even realizing it, and to really think about how we can help our constituents begin to play and learn what it is. And so to that end, we've had a few staff dabble here and there, a little bit in programs here and there, but this fall in September, final date TBD, we're going to host an AI discovery lab. And our intention is to create an environment where we have different stations set up. So if you want to understand AI for job seekers, AI for everyday life, AI in assistive technology, you can come in and actually use it and experiment with it without having to set up an account or figure out what is the right tool for this. So we really want to create an opportunity for people to come in, test things out, ask good questions, and hopefully get good answers. And that activity is going to then inform other future programs for the public. So that was kind of, I threw out a lot there. I think that for me, looking at how do we deliver service across our 26 locations, I'm focused on that balance between how do we help the staff understand things so they're looking at this through a framework of curiosity, and then how do we begin to work with the public to meet their needs and help them learn as well. So that's kind of my intro as well. And then, Ben, I wanted to ask you, we were talking about this when we had a chance to connect last week, because I think this is something people think of and may or may not feel comfortable asking, but there are some real concerns around, particularly for me, sustainability and in the environment, and sort of ethics and copyright concerns. As a researcher, as someone who really knows about this, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, it's a great question, Meaghan, and thanks for that. The context as well at DCPL. I feel like it's really grounding to hear what you all are up to and what the responses have been rather candidly from everyone. So thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time, and I think overwhelming as well for many different facets of this work, as I'm sure you can imagine. I think certainly what you highlighted there with questions around the environmental impact of these, generative AI, the data storage facilities, data centers that are involved in all of this is certainly non-trivial and is only going to increase. I also think, coming from a context in sort of more grounded in academic research, my PhD was in sort of machine learning. Having been sort of grounded in that space, I think a lot of questions around how one even goes about sustaining sort of academic research in this context, where the amount of funding and staff time and everything to prop up these experiments or even run things operationally are massive, and has driven this to more opaque parts of for-profit industry that I think remains rather complex or fraught in many cases. So all just to say that I think in some senses there are more questions than answers that come here. But I do think, and I think that this is what I alluded to when we talked, I do see the public library setting as a really, really valuable one. I think both, not just thinking about what AI can contribute to public libraries, but sort of reverse of this, in sort of a complementary fashion, because I think really grounding this work in terms of what can have substantive impact to the public on the terms that are most valuable to patrons themselves is extremely important for this conversation. And I think, of course, public libraries are an incredibly important use case for this, but I think more generally speaking, thinking about this setting as one where the experimentation that you all are thinking about at DCPL and more broadly for people on this call is a really valuable one that can actually sort of steer this conversation in a meaningful direction in terms of what generative AI might mean, where the limitations are, where we might actually really want to carve out spaces where we don't apply generative AI, for example. Having that level of intervention, I think, can be just as valuable here. So certainly I'm not pushing the agenda that we should all just use generative AI wherever possible. So I think
I really appreciate that point, Ben, because I think we've spoken about this before, whatever AI, we're sort of in that we're climbing up the hill of public frenzy. There's so much money being put into these different products. It's going to peak like all tech things do, and it's going to settle out, and AI is going to exist in our worlds in some way. And I think if libraries lean in, we have an opportunity to say, this is what makes sense. This is what could work, instead of just waiting to see what someone else decides it's going to be.
definitely.
Hi, Felton. You just turned on your camera. How are you?
Yes, I'm good, Meaghan.
Good
I
to
just
see you.
stepped in. I was supposedly I thought kind of moderating it, but you guys are doing such a good job that I don't need to even be here. However, I did have a question that just came up in my mind, and I'll throw it to Ben, and I'll turn my camera off so you guys can kind of discuss it. But Ben, what does this mean for how librarians are trained? What should we library schools be looking to do to make our new librarians more thoughtful around the concept of AI, and what should we be doing, Meaghan, I would ask of you in the public setting to provide clear benefit to the people.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Felton. I think it's a fantastic one. From the perspective of what we can be offering, I think, to emerging library professionals, those in MLIS programs and beyond, I think for me, a large part of this conversation is sort of demystifying AI and making it clear that this isn't a topic that requires some special sort of secret coding ability that someone gets via some course life path that's not very clear. Like, I think part of the goal that I think an MLIS program should have, and something that we've been discussing out at the University of Washington around the MLIS curriculum, is how to really make it clear that students can have a hands-on understanding of what AI is. This means, developing some proficiency with using these tools and teaching these tools. So that, I think, is a large part of it for me. I think the other part of it that's really sort of meaningful in my mind is, again, trying to build out a curriculum that also makes it clear that the other skill sets that one's developing in a non-tech course setting are not just sort of complementary, but are really important and informative in the AI discussion, right? So questions around broader library practices, I think, are incredibly informative in terms of how one begins to think about using AI as another tool or another technology that's emerged here for librarians to begin to use. So I would say that, at least in my experience, it's been a really interesting time in terms of how we build coursework out that is both accessible and meaningful in terms of giving people the chance to feel like they have hands-on experience with the tools, while also recognizing that the goal is not to sort of displace the profession or practice through the use of AI itself. But again, thanks for the question. I'll turn it over to Meaghan. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I think demystifying, Ben, I think you really hit it there. I think it's the same for, as we train new staff, I think it's the same as we work with our current staff and with the public. And I think when we're in Miami, I use the term critical curiosity, and I think that really applies here because I see in my social media feeds some people saying like AI is gonna, it's gonna save us all, and then other people saying AI is gonna doom us all, and neither of those is going to be 100% true. So how do we ask the right questions to understand what it means, where it's useful, and where the boundary lines are? And how do we, as we have always tried to do for information literacy, how do we help our customers ask the same questions? And then, thinking about how it overlaps with our information literacy and mis and disinformation work, also how to help people not, walk right into a scam or walk into a situation where they've used AI in a way that may get them into some ethical hot water in their job or a job, application. So to make sure that people understand what it is and the implications of using it and are asking good questions, but also are expressing curiosity. Like, it is an interesting and different thing. And like, what does that mean? That's fascinating to me. That's fun. That's the fun part of being a librarian.
Definitely. And I think one other thing that I'll go ahead and add as extending what you were talking about earlier, Meaghan, is I think the DC AI values statement that I know has been dropped in the chat that I had a chance to look at, I think is really nice as an idea in terms of giving people some familiarity about how to get one's head around AI. And I know we've been seeing this in various contexts. I know at university libraries, like conversation with Joe Lucia, who I know on this call has been really, really productive in hearing what they all have been up to. And so all just to say that I think seeing these pockets emerging in different parts of the conversation, whether public libraries, university libraries, municipal settings, is all really valuable. And so I think the question that we're focused and interested on in this call is sort of how do these pockets cropping up at various public libraries can coalesce into a broader discussion among library leaders and directors in terms of stewarding the next steps. But John, I see you have your hand up.
So formal.
Exactly.
Well, I'm trying to obey the norms, and my Amazon Alexa just turned on too while I was talking. I don't know what just happened while I was turning that on. So, one, just from a process, at the risk of taking us away from the topic and making it kind of process and kind of meta, these conversations we've had for the most part this spring and in Miami were with public libraries and public librarians and public library directors. As I scan the virtual room, the preponderance of folks are sitting inside of either nonprofits or state-based or in higher ed in various ways and form. And, one thing that's come up in the conversations, and you guys just alluded to it a little bit, is how we are one field, but with very different settings and very different, sets of stakeholders. And there also feels like there's an opportunity, right? So I guess it's always fraught, and it's striking to me how rarely we have cross-pollination across, academic and publics, and we're kind of been doing that a little bit. I mean, you guys are literally doing that right now. And I guess my question for you is that helping? Do you see that as being additive? Or should we, as we're specking out, maybe this is a question for you, Meaghan, as we're diving deeper, Ben, into developing some of these prototyping that we're talking about doing, should we just be focused on the public library use case, and because the contexts are so different? And bit of a jumble of questions. So not to put you on the spot, Meaghan, but
I mean,
can you
think
can you speak for all public librarians?
Let me please speak for all public librarians when I have like esteemed public library directors on the call. I don't think that's what I should do. But what I'll say is I have found it to be hugely additive, and in a couple different ways. The first thing was hearing Ben's really specific use of AI in his work at LC. Really, it became an example I could use with other public library people to help them see, like, this is a useful tool in a library setting. Now, of like Library of Congress and public libraries are very different, but it still was a practical implementation that people could wrap their heads around, even if our collections and purposes are really different. So that was incredibly helpful. And then, of course, because I'm talking to Ben specifically, who is an expert on this, it's helped me, expand my own understanding of what is AI and how can it be used. And, I think going back to, curiosity is one of my core values. So I always want to hear from people outside of a public library setting, because it only strengthens our work. If we only look at public libraries, how are we going to benefit from what other people are doing, and how can they benefit from what we're doing?
And I'll just add, thanks, Meaghan. Reciprocally, I think it's been incredibly valuable for me, coming from my context, to see the public library as a setting for really thinking through these questions sort of in a very specific way, in terms of what does it look like to have members of the public or patrons engaging with AI? What are the real questions they're bringing to the table that they're curious about? And what does the kind of programming, the kinds of organizational values, or even the kinds of collection development work look like that would be most enriching from that experience? And so I think that grounding has been super valuable for myself in terms of all these conversations. And so it's been a really wonderful opportunity to be embedded with you all. And I thank you for taking me on as I learn more about your context and all of your areas of expertise too. So just to say that I certainly see the reciprocal side of this to be enormously beneficial for me.
Well, I want to thank both of you. I have one last question for both, and then we'll turn it over and see if there are any questions with the participants. But it is the one thing when I had the first conversation with you, Ben, about this in Miami or whatever, you brought such a calm to the discussion. Everybody was like freaking out, and you're just like, why? Everything's okay. Nothing's going to change. And even to that, folks will be like, why don't we have a big class at the University of Washington to make sure that everybody just gets trained in AI? For both of you, how do we work with our folks to let them understand that this is something they're going to live with, but they have to just work through it and accept that this is change that has some issues and there will be challenges, but for the most part, it's going to be for the betterment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of it for me goes back to what Meaghan was saying, in terms of recognizing that there's sort of this wide spectrum of responses that it seems like AI elicits, and recognizing that, sort of course, understanding the real implications for this in a real substantive sense in terms of the concrete harms that AI can bring, I do not mean to dismiss, but certainly then thinking about it from the perspective of what does this offer us, maybe taking a step back to reflect, I think has been really helpful. And so, for at least from my perspective, I do, again, think that there's a way in which the conversation around AI can feel very one-sided in terms of like, this is happening, it's inevitable, there's nothing we can do. Like, what are we supposed to do in the face of this, and do we have to change everything? And I do actually see this setting as one where we have an opportunity to steer the course a little bit in a substantive way, and or say this is how we want to use AI, explore the use cases that are most beneficial to us. So I think reframing it around the ways in which we do have agency in this conversation to be a really valuable part of it, and taking a deep breath and a step back. And I see, even this conversation that we started last February and one that we're going to continue into next February to be a real part of that. But I'll turn it over to Meaghan as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think, specifically for DC and the specific conversations I've had, the DC government guiding values have been really helpful, because as I've worked with staff who have some fear, I can say, like, the mayor has made a commitment that when we deploy this, we're going to be thinking about benefit to the people, equity, sustainability, right? So that's baked in for us, and that's a really nice place to be able to stand from. And then, yeah, sort of similar to what you were saying, Ben, like, in talking to people, however they feel, like, that's okay. It's a lot to take in, and it's a lot to learn, but bringing it back to what I said before, however you may feel, we are the public library. And so you're at your job, you're here to work, and at the public library, we're going to figure out what this means for our community. And I think there's space for some of our staff who may have more anxiety or fear, to bring a perspective of how do we help people, understand it so they don't get scammed. And that's helpful. And then there are other staff who are going to be like, how do we help people, create a whole new business, whatever, using this technology? And there's space and need for both of those things at the public library. So I think, like anything, acknowledging how people feel, being clear about where the agency is headed, and that we don't have necessarily an agency opinion that AI will rule all or AI is the devil, but we must explore it. It's part of our work. And then giving space for people to follow what connects with them is going to get us the best result. You're muted, Felton.
Oh, great. All right. So thank you both. Let's see if there are any questions that anyone would like to throw out. You can always put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A. I want to make sure that if anyone has any questions for you, they're able to put this out. You guys are very good together as a partner on this. It's
Thank
like if anyone did, if there are no questions, it's just because
They
everybody
should take it on the
understood.
road. They should
We're
take it
gonna
on
do
the
a
road,
roadshow.
you guys.
Yeah, right.
roadshow.
Everybody took it, and it was like, oh, that was really good. So
I will say, because I see a couple of the folks who have either been involved with these conversations that Ben's convened, or we've not been able to find a time that works for some of you. We will be following up, and we'll be sharing out for the community that gathered in February in Miami, kind of a follow-up document that we'll also publish, kind of articulating and coalescing some of what we've heard and some of what Ben and Meaghan just touched on.
yeah, and I love the idea of the AI values. All of our organizations might at some point in time, probably sooner than later, start thinking about where our AI values are for the organization. So let's see if there's a question. Oh, no, even Marcellus says you guys are a great team.
Hi, Marcellus.
Thank you. Marcellus.
I think when those of us were referencing the august directors in the room, I know Meaghan and I were both and T across the room.
Yes. All right, very good. All right, well, thank you, Ben and Meaghan. You guys can go off camera, then we'll have a few minutes. If anyone still has any questions they want to ask over everything that may have been brought up from Sarah or from Meaghan and Ben, everybody can jump back on, but we just want to make sure everybody has some time to ask any questions that you might have for the organization. Don't be scared of Sarah. She's really nice. All right. Well, no questions. I think we're in a good place. Let's see. Wait a minute if there's another question in there. There's just the same one. So I think we're in a place that we want to thank all of you for being with us today, and thank our speakers, and thank Sarah and the committee for all their work. And more to come here soon, right? So,
And just
yeah.
to name
Go
check
ahead,
the
John.
couple of the, I just want to, yeah, I want to just, while we're doing the thanks, and I saw a couple of the folks who helped lead the review sessions with us, and I want to make sure to shout them out. A couple of folks are still here. Kayla Sayas Ruiz, I saw Chelsea was here a second ago. I think Anne was here. So thank you in person. Oh, there's Chelsea. To the folks who rolled up their sleeves. And I'm actually just sending a note to one of you. We'll be back in touch soon. The group we pulled together was so helpful and rich that we want to continue the conversation. So just, you know, no obligation, but we'll be back in touch with that group too.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, this meeting is adjourned.